Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being a part of this in-person event in San Francisco. Thank you for our panelists. We will go through the introductions, but once again, thank you so much for being here. This is it is the Valentine's Day. Thank you for showing us all your love and your love for APIs and sharing that with us as well. So, to start off, I am Budha, Product Evangelist at Tyke. Today, we're going to be exploring an interesting topic which has been doing the rounds for a little while. It's all about platform engineering and platform operations. The official title of the topic for today's event is Streamlining Platform Engineering and Operations to Maximize Impact. We are living in uncertain times economically, and efficiency is all the buzz right now. So we're going to be looking at what we've got in store for platform engineering in 2023, some of the pitfalls, some of the challenges, some of the possible ways in which you can make the most out of it. Hopefully in for a really, really exciting conversation. Thank you everyone for showing up once again. And I'll probably pass on the mic and do a round of introductions. So over to you, Derric.
Appreciate having you here. My name's Derric Gilling, the CEO of Moesif for the API Analytics platform. Love to talk about anything from developer experience, monetization. I think this is a very interesting topic in 2023, given the discussions around efficiency around different companies.
My name's Ken Lane. I'm Chief Evangelist for Postman. Do a lot of different things. I run our open technologies group. So all the API specifications, Open API, Async API, JSON schema, GraphQL, gRPC, WebSockets, Spectral rules is my latest jam. But I do a lot of things and kind of the face of our company when it comes to our customers. So evangelism, been doing it a long time. Started in 2010 and been doing it ever since. Big fan of both Moesif and Tyke, longtime supporters, and appreciate you all being here.
Thank you so much for the introduction. And again, I am Budha, Product Evangelist at Tyke. So a little bit about Tyke as well. Tyke is an API management platform, and we look into all things APIs. You've got an APIs, and you're looking to gain value out of it. API management is the way to go. I host the All About APIs podcast. Two really big inspirations of mine sitting right over here. We've actually interacted a lot over the years, over the 3 years, but this is the first time we're actually meeting in person, so this is a bit of a fanboy moment for me. So, bear with if I'm giggling and smiling a little too much. But over to today's topic. I think let's dive in. Like I said, the topic we're exploring is platform engineering, and obviously it's a relatively new topic, and I think you guys probably agree with that as well. So what I thought we will start off with is a little bit of definitions, just to set the scene a little bit, to explore what is platform engineering, what your take on that is, and then we'll go into the big topic of DevOps versus platform engineering. Is it really a thing? But okay, let's start off with platform engineering and what it is. So maybe Derric, you start off with you.
Sure. So when we think about platform engineering, it basically empowers all of your developers to act as if they're a Google developer, right? So that team can provide the right tooling, products, processes, and everything else to make them more efficient at their job day to day, right? And so if we look at a lot of different terms out there, there's DevOps, there's platform ops, platform engineering, and so on and so forth. I like to look at DevOps as more of it's a principle, right? It's a philosophy at the company, right? But platform engineering, it's a way to enable that to happen, right? It enables those developers to really take DevOps to the next level, whether it's, how do you deploy, how do you actually test that in different environments, how do you get that to production in a nice, easy way. So it's also a little bit different than, something like SRE, which has a very different customer. So when you look at someone like SRE, they're focused on the customer itself and their needs, right? So a customer cares about reliability, customer cares about performance, customer cares about, well, hopefully it doesn't cost too much, and SRE can maybe drive down those costs. Whereas a platform engineering team, the customer is more of an individual developer at the company itself, right? So they're serving the needs of the company versus the customers of the company.
I support all that. I think that describes it well. I'm going to come at it from a very API-centric standpoint because I see APIs everywhere. I'm you ever see that movie Sixth Sense? The kid sees dead people everywhere. I see APIs everywhere. I'm that kid. So I really see platform engineering as building a platform for your developers to kind of operate on. But it's about building APIs as well, producing and building APIs as well as consuming APIs, because what are these developers using? What are you enabling? So it's APIs. So your AWS infrastructure has APIs. So you're using APIs to deliver your APIs. Has an API, Moesif has an API, everything's got APIs. So this really the center of the universe when it comes to building the platform that we operate our businesses on, that developers work on daily, and we all need and depend on to do our job. So that's the platform I live on, and definitely the API-centric view of the world.
Agree with all of that. Interesting enough, I think the conversation when we talk about platform engineering tends to go from a stakeholder perspective. It tends to be the internal developer that we are talking about in most cases. It's a very internal developer platform that we are working towards, and the conversation then very rapidly shifts towards, okay, how do we make things more efficient? How do we make life a little bit easier for developers, and how does that all look like in organizations? There are typically a couple of types of developers, I would say. The ones who are really looking at what is out there, the innovators essentially, looking at speakers at conferences and looking at what's next coming in. There's also a group of folks who are just looking to get the job done the best possible way, fastest possible time, and just go back home and enjoy the day. So I think you need to probably cater for both of those audiences a little bit more here and understand, okay, what does the platform need to offer to both those target audiences? Because I believe innovation is driven by standardization. So if you have the right guardrails in place and the right governance is in place, then innovation will thrive. Otherwise, you'll be in a little bit of trouble. So that's kind of my take on this, sort of just talking about the internal stakeholders, the stakeholders that are sort of part of this whole platform engineering conversation. So your take on this in terms of, who do you see those stakeholders as being? Is it just the developers? Do you see more people being involved? What's the role of, say, DevOps, for instance, and how that's evolving as this conversation progresses?
Sure. So just speaking on all the different audiences, when it comes to platform engineering, I like to use the term batteries included, or batteries optional and included. What that means is you have the batteries with whatever device you're buying, but you can take them out and put something else there, right? And so you're going to always have that one developer that wants to do something very special. So you need to have the special APIs, the special workflows, so they can actually get their job done, right? But it's also very important to have a standard across the company, right? Because if every product team is doing their own thing and deploying in different ways and all that stuff, they're not going to have a standard, and it's going to be a very inefficient process, right? And so when we think about, I guess, platform engineering, there's a couple of different stakeholders. You have the individual product teams, right, that have a certain workflow that they care about. You have, separate internal teams across a company, whether it's SRE, the platform engineering team. But you also have folks like finance, right? And other areas that care about how much does it cost? How do we make this more efficient? And then finally, there's even things like recruiting and HR, where you can actually use this as a selling point, right? And this is something that a lot of people don't really talk on, because no one wants to join a company where everything's ad hoc and crazy and a mess. You can actually talk about your platform engineering as a strength for the company, right? And so they may actually want to publish that on an engineering blog or something else.
Yeah, I support that. I think, we'll see how far and fast we go this year as far as defining this, and how wide of a net we cast. So definitely enabling developers, building on what DevOps kind of set the stage for this. But I totally buy into business HR, like get everyone on this platform, because it benefits everybody to be on this, to be enabled. And nobody likes working in a dumpster fire. Everyone likes to have the room to do things. And I did one interview on the podcast this year with a friend of mine that he likened it to kind of Heroku. How many know what Heroku is? Remember Heroku? It's demise. I'll shed a little tear for Heroku. It still exists, and my friend's the owner of it, but Salesforce bought it, and it's now a paid tier. But it was kind of the free, like, get it done cloud platform. Like AWS was what businesses did. It was before Azure was around, but Heroku, you could stand up a database and compute everything you needed to get going real quick. It really put the guardrails on your IT infrastructure fast. You could stand up anything with Heroku and just super fast, and you could share it with people, and people could clone it and create templates, and we need that for internal in the enterprise. That's what he. Yeah, platform. It was. I think it was the only one that kind of lived up to the promise. But how do we stand up Heroku's for every discipline of business, including HR, finance, and others?
So the tricky one again, like you say, where once we start talking about different stakeholders, the important part again comes down to, okay, how do we make sure that we are having the right conversations? Because one of the conversations that I'm seeing too frequently these days is DevOps is dead and platform engineering is the new thing. We've seen this pattern sort of pop up over and over again. I think we were talking about this. We saw the same trend with microservices versus monoliths. We saw the same trend with SOAP versus REST, REST versus GraphQL, and I'm pretty sure there's going to be another new thing which is going to kill something else, although that's probably not the right conversation. So the question is, obviously, is it true or not, whether DevOps is truly dead or not, or what is the evolution, the next step that we are looking with, what we've learned with DevOps, and potentially marrying that up with developer experience and making things a little bit better?
Sure. I wouldn't say it's dead. It's definitely evolved, though. So, when DevOps was first coined, I guess, it was always the bridging between developers and ops itself. But nowadays, there's a lot of different ops teams at a company. You have revenue ops, you have security ops, and so on and so forth. So if you look at the next generation of, I guess, DevOps, it's how do you bridge the gap from ops to developers to security team. So now we have DevSecOps, you have revenue ops, and so on. So I guess it'll be very interesting to see how we empower all these other teams that are not necessarily part of the engineering org with the right tools to get their job done. And even things like Zapier, which is a phenomenal tool. How do you enable the sales team to have that type of experience to set up their workflows, don't have to really bother engineering to get stuff done?
Yeah, it's for me, and I was saying this before we started get going. I'm an evangelist, so I'm chief evangelist at Postman, but I have a blog called API Evangelist that's been up since 2010, and I cover the space. I've been doing this a while, and my claim, what I do is I'm a storyteller. I just look for stories, and I listen to people and I tell stories, and that's all that matters in the space. APIs don't matter. None of these technical things matter. It's just the stories we tell, the stories we share. And what you're seeing is these cycles, because we need freshness. We need stories to change. We don't want to feel stale. We want to feel like we're moving forward. So we reinvent the world. We use different words to come up with ways of talking about and quantifying the world around us. So that's all this is. Nothing's dead. Dead is dead. I mean, it's like, it's just, my wife has her master's in folklore and storytelling. So this is how we build culture. This is how we integrate, we work together to do things. And so words matter. And so it's always going to evolve. And I used to get really pissed off when like the GraphQL community really pissed me off in the early days. And sorry for saying, on camera, but I love the GraphQL community. I'm a database guy. I love GraphQL. But the way they approached, and a certain part of how we finance our world, venture capital, has really invested in this kind of, all right, what was before is dead. Now you got to do the new thing because it's where it's at and it's where we're going to make money. So if you can set aside the money, if you can set aside the use of the word dead, it's just natural storytelling, and you can ride each wave. Everything that's coming is always interesting, exciting, and renewed, and it's fun. But sometimes people make it not so fun with certain marketing trends.
Yeah, it's a little unfortunate. Unfortunately, I think I'm on a mission to talk a little bit more about responsible evangelism at some point. I think we'll have a conversation about that and the role that everybody has to play in it. But coming back to the topic, I think an interesting thing is just scaling back and looking behind the curtains in terms of the true issues that I think gave rise to DevOps in the first place, and then what is actually what platform engineering is looking to solve. I think there's a couple of challenges, like I think we touched upon previously from developers' perspective, where they were suddenly thrown into a world where you have to now manage a whole lot of things beyond just building software. You have to think about infrastructure, and you have to think about, okay, how do you get on the cloud native train and being part of containers and the security that comes with it, and managing all of these different other administrative tasks that essentially take away from some of the software engineering that I think originally was scoped out for them. And I think that, again, was the death of productivity to a certain extent. And then that also meant that you're doing things that you probably aren't an expert in, but you're expected to do some of those things. So do you see then, when we talk about the evolution of DevOps into platform engineering, with developer experience coming, do you see that sort of changing a little bit and being a little bit more focused with new teams coming in with a very specific purpose of making things a little bit better, with enabling developers to do specific things, platform engineers looking to do something else, and that whole thing working more harmoniously?
I like to look at teams like microservices, right? And so when you start your company, you don't need a platform engineer. You don't need a security engineer. You don't need a lot of things, right? You're probably going to start off with just a full stack engineer, maybe a designer, a couple other folks, right? And then once you get to, let's say 10, 15 people, okay, now that's enough people where you need to start actually automating some of these processes, right? It's too much for each developer to be managing their own environment, to be managing their own deployment process. And so you're probably going to hire a DevOps engineer, Danny, looking at you over there, to get the right CI/CD processes in place and everything else, right? But then at some point, it's not just about the CI/CD stuff that we all like to talk about in the last few years. Now you need to start thinking about, okay, each individual developer wants to actually do a lot of things that is not part of just the deployment flow. So how do you actually empower those individual developers to do their job better? And so once you're at that point, then you start thinking about maybe a platform engineering team, which is like another, I guess, piece in the pie, right? And so you're always splitting the pie as the team grows bigger, just like the microservices world. And I like to pick on microservices on the flip side of this, because you don't need to start a company to have 1,000 microservices. That's not the way you build something that customers should be using. It's perfectly fine to have one massive monolithic application at the very beginning, but then you start breaking that down into smaller and smaller pieces. And so when you look at like an engineering org, you have a very similar way that you build this organically.
Yeah, it's all, and this stuff's complex. There's a lot, and as you scale and grow, it gets more and more complex. But over time, things get more complex, and we abstract away a lot of the complexity of yesterday. So, the way compute works, the way the cloud, I mean, I myself here, but, we used to load up racks and hardware and servers and drive them in my car in the trunk between data centers, and used to do a lot of this stuff that I don't do anymore. It's been abstracted away. I've been enabled to be more more successful and agile in what I do. So, and the same from a business perspective, licensing, SaaS, the business is getting abstracted away. And so this is all just, platforms are just about enablement and making us be more successful, back to the innovation, giving us the space, hopefully. And we're managing chaos and we're managing complexity in sensible ways. And so platforms are just about making sure you have what you need. It's stable. You can deal with change, and change doesn't totally rock your boat and rock your world, and you're able to keep building things that matter.
100%. I think the interesting thing, just going back on microservices a little bit, because I think we had a API extravaganza which we had put together, and I think there was a hot take around service and the whole history around it, some of the key challenges around it, and it's not exactly what it was all made out to be. I think that brings me back to a conversation around scale, which, like you mentioned, where we talk about when we started. So right now, if you look at the trend, it always comes down to, if you're doing this, you are not considered successful. And I suspect that's going to be the case with platform engineering, that if you don't have a platform engineering team, you're probably not successful enough. Just like if you don't have microservices, you're not enough. So there is always a conversation of scale. Like you say, it's probably not day one when you need platform engineering. So is there a point at which you need to start considering it, where things are starting to break a little bit more, where your developers are doing a little bit too much of repetitive tasks and you need to automate some of those things? Is that when you start thinking about it? What would you say, when do you start thinking about having platform engineering teams, or even if it's a one-person team, that it should be part of your conversation, it should be part of your organization?
Sure, I guess there's three ways to look at it. One is when things start breaking, that might be a good point to start going on the hunt for some platform engineers. The second way is, when you start building out your org, and there's different ways to build this out. You might have, one single product, and that's all you need, and they all work together very closely. But then over time, you want to expand your market, and you start building another product, and it has very similar functionalities, or maybe is using some of the same things, but still a separate product team with their own needs. And then you might want to start, I guess, centralizing a lot of the things that could be centralized across these different teams, so they have the right guardrails in place. Because again, it's trying to avoid the repetition. You don't want each product team doing the same thing that every other product team is doing at the same company, right? And so this is when you can start abstracting away, as Ken was saying, abstracting away the pieces that are not necessarily part of the product, but now part of the platform itself, right? So I guess one way is to look at it, maybe number of product teams that you have. It could be when things are breaking. Another way, it could be just number of engineers that you have at the company itself.
So just to recap for the video, so is when your code in your development environment runs and it works, and then you run the same code in production and it doesn't work, you need some consistency, you got some issues, and so you're going to need a platform engineering. Definitely. It's not just consistency in the services, it's consistency in your environments and across the life cycle. So I agree with all of that. I would add one thing that I'm seeing is when your engineers start leaving. So when your engineers start leaving there anymore because they don't have the room to innovate, their things are inconsistent. Their work that they worked hard on in development that gets put in production and it doesn't work, and they don't have any control or say in production to do anything, and successful. Want to stick around, they're going to go somewhere with a platform team. So to have the cool kids working at your company invest in platform.
That's a good point.
I think an interesting one there is also the predictability of software engineering, I think, because it sounds very boring, I feel, in some cases where predictable things are considered boring, standard things are considered boring. But ultimately, if you're deploying something, you're working on something, what's working today, ideally, you would want that same code when it's run tomorrow to give you similar results, regardless of environments in most cases. So I think that's what, I think having that standard practices and policies in place to actually enable something like that through platforms and through platform engineering and the operations that go with it, that's what's going to make life a little bit easier. It's going to give you that room, that space to innovate. And hopefully, engineers don't leave the company a little bit more. And I think that's what I see as a big driver, where I think predictability is a good thing. Standardization is a good thing. For me, I would want to focus on providing business value or trying something out that's actually, that's working, an application that solves a problem, instead of getting into the nitty-gritty of the infrastructure or getting in the nitty-gritty of, okay, the environments are not working, I need to set up these environments, I need to have the right testing done, and it's too process right now. I don't want to be at all caring about any of those things. I would want to focus on the work that I really that excites me, and let all of these guardrails guide me to a simple path, a more productive path. And I think that's what I've come across this term a little bit. I don't know if it's an industry standard or not, but it's a golden path for developers, essentially. It's essentially the right guardrails put in place to enable us to do our best work. I think we've had similar conversations around API governance as well. I think governance sort of followed a similar pattern there. And I feel like now with developer operations coming together with governance and the critical element of developer experience overall, that's what is the essence of platform engineering, I would think. So I know you guys are a little bit quite big on developer experience, so how do you sort of see that experience expanding with the conversation of platform engineering coming into the fold?
Sure, I guess speaking on developer experience, it really touches every area of the company, right? It's not just there's a single developer experience team. It impacts everyone from product design and API design to the platform engineering team itself, and how they empower a developer to ship a feature fast that supports maybe an external developer that cares about something, maybe it's an internal other team that cares about something. When we think about developer experience, everything from how long does it take to explore a brand new service they've never seen before in their life, get up and running, and make that very first API call. We like to talk about time to first hello world or time to API call. And again, this could be applicable to a API that you're selling, right, like a developer platform, but it's equally equivalent to an internal team, right? If you have one team that's providing services to other teams, how quickly can they find the documentation? How quickly can they get the API keys or whatever they need to do to authenticate to this API? And what do they need to get started? Is there some examples? Is there an internal wiki of some sort? Spotify actually pushed out a really beautiful internal, I guess, developer portal / wiki thing, which looks really cool. So I recommend checking that out.
Yeah, it's your overall experience in the day. It's not just the tools in your IDE. It's like, how do you feel when you go home? How do you feel when you come to work? Do you dread coming to work? What's the experience like living your day as a developer? And are you enabled? Do you feel supported? Do you have what you need? Governance is like, I spent a lot of time on API governance, and I'm the first to admit no one cares about API governance. I'm sorry. I do, I guess, but governance, I tell leadership who come to me and go, we want, API governance. And it's like, well, why? And they talk about all the things, the inconsistent APIs, all the things. Like, well, they're just not enabled. You're not providing them with the tools. You're not providing them with the standards. You're not enabling them in the ways that matter. And that's why you see governance. And it works like society. Like, what's the experience of living in a city? How many cities have you lived in? What's the governance like? How is the society enabled? And I'll pick on San Francisco a little bit, as far as, out on the streets and how you feel. What's the experience of coming to San Francisco? From the pick on you because you come into town, the experience coming from the airport, the cab versus riding BART, that go into your hotel. And so experiencing your day as a developer, what's your life like? And it makes a big difference in where you work. And I'm working with a lot of large companies right now who want to be tech companies, and they want to invest in developer experience because no one wants to come out of university and work at their company. They last for 6 months and then they go work somewhere else. And so developer experience matters.
100%. I think, again, governance has been one of my areas of exploration. I've been harping on the fact that governance it's not the most exciting thing that you'll come across, but it is the thing that enables you to do the exciting things usually. I think that's the whole point, and I think that's been my selling point within the organization. And coming from an API management company, I think that's one of the core parts of things that we explore and enable, because we talk about access control and we talk about the right policies in place and making life easy for the API developers, the backend developers, and things that we're building. Don't worry about managing your APIs and writing your own code for security, writing your own code for publishing or versioning and things like that. Let the API management stuff do that. You focus on providing true business value, and the combination of which will enable you to do great things. But governance is important. The overall experience, like you say, of how you feel the day you get into work. Are you going to be fighting fires, or is it going to be a day where you feel you've accomplished something? And I think that may not be a single day, it may be a combination of days. And I think that's what something like platform engineering is going to be enabling. Moving on to the next little bit about the adoption of platform engineering. So we spoke a little bit about, okay, when do you get started? What scale are you looking at? But equally, what would be the enablers of adopting platform engineering within an organization? I think we touched a little bit upon communication with different stakeholders, specifically the internal developers, and how that is going to play a really, really key area, because you need to know what kind of flows they're working with, what kind of guardrails they actually need. and sort of mapping that out as part of your overall strategy. But beyond that, process, people, tools, anything that comes to mind that enables people to adopt platform engineering as part of their organization.
I would say, as you even thinking about adopting some type of platform engineering concept, it's all about the goals of the business itself, right? So we talk about API governance, for example. That could mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, right? So governance could actually help you with reliability of the API itself to protect your infrastructure. It could mean ensuring the guardrails are in place for someone that's developing an API to make sure they're conforming to some type of standard across the company. It could mean something like a quota limit, which is actually more around the business side of the API, especially if this is something exposed publicly, right? And so I like to speak on things like quota limits versus rate limits, which could mean very different things in very different audience and purpose. So as you think about platform engineering, it's coming from one of these areas. It might come from the reliability of the platform. It may come from the business side. They actually care about these things from a customer standpoint. Or it may come from the individual developers themselves. How do you make sure you have the right standard across all these different product teams that are trying to ship things very, very quickly? And at the end of the day, that's what product teams care about. They need to deliver what their customers are asking for, which means they need to ship fast. So how do you empower those developers to ship fast?
Yeah, the three pillars for Postman, what we focus on is well, and it depends on whether I'm talking to the bottom up people on the ground floor versus leadership. So I tend to code switch between the two. But the three pillars is collaboration. So working together, productivity. If I'm talking to leadership, like how do you get people doing things that you want them to be doing? But people working together, talking, sharing, communicating around this. That's how you set this in motion, because you got to have buy-in if people aren't talking about it and on the same page. Automation. So CI/CD is a pretty core aspect of that. Monitoring, how do you automate and do more with less? That's a core aspect of platform engineering. If we got to be able to do more with less, we got to be able to automate the world around us, automate away the mundane things, and then, as you said, governance, enablement, standards, making sure that this is as consistent and it's easy to do the right thing. Very few people in your enterprise want to do the wrong thing and screw things up on a daily basis. So enabling them to do the right thing, make the right decisions in the moment is really a key part of this. And so when you're ready, like, you can look at all those things. If you don't have a platform team, it's like, are people in silos? It's like, all right, we need to collaborate. Are we all working our asses off and working way too hard and we need to automate and do more? Are things inconsistent? So we look at it in terms of your journey, where you're at. We tend to consider it API early, more API aware, and then API first is how we look at it. It's kind of the signals will show themselves, and platform is how we enable and build all of that.
Great. Thank you so much for those insights. I think I'm curious, you've been listening to us for a little while now, if you've got questions or your own take on the topic of platform engineering. Anyone from the audience, perhaps, before we go into maybe closing statements or something? Any insights, any questions from the audience at all? I see we've got a new audience member about to join us in a little while. Yes, please, go ahead. Maybe.
You talked about how platform ops could be like a way to introduce like consistency. Consistency comes with standards. How do you go about introducing changes into those standards? In my experience, when I worked in a big company, they had they didn't call it platforms engineering team, but they had a team that was kind of pushing standards for API development, even for like front-end development. These are the tools that you have to use because this is going to go into our bigger product. And there were teams that wanted to, especially my team wanted to move to the more advanced framework, but the platform team that was kind of setting the standards took long time to get there, and that also left people frustrated. So standards slowly. And it would be good to hear your thoughts on approach changes.
Thank you so much for the question. Looks like a bit of a process problem there, but maybe you start off.
Make it the shiny new object that a different team can enroll and try, right? So maybe it's not your core product, right? You don't want to roll it out to everyone because that would be a very, very hard rollout strategy. But try a POC with a team, right? And say, hey, would you be interested in trying this new approach, to development, and see if they like it, right? And then continue to work with them, collaborate with them to get their feedback, so that the platform engineering can continue to iterate on whatever it is that they're trying to improve on. I mean, change management is definitely a hard thing to get right? Once developers have a certain process that they're used to, they don't want to change to something different, right? But you're always going to find a couple folks or a couple teams that are like, no, I don't like what this is, right? I want to try something different. So it's about seeking those teams out.
So here's my most recent story. So version 10 of Postman, which released September 15th last year. So I rolled in Spectral Rules. So if you're familiar with Spectral Rules, it's an open source project from Stoplight, and it's a way of linting your open APIs and your async APIs, your JSON schemas for that consistency that you're talking about. So when the product released, I was asked, what are the base rules we should turn on for the product? So I came up with about 35-ish rules. They were the OWASP top 10 were the first set, and then there was a handful of open API rules. And try turning on 35 rules for 20 million developers and see what kind of response you get. So I didn't do it for all 25. We rolled it out in waves, and we quickly put on a switch because no one likes to see a whole bunch of you just made 35 mistakes on every API. And then you can turn them on in your CI/CD pipeline. So no better way to piss off developers than just start throwing rules in your CI/CD pipeline. So what we're working on today, I was doing it with John Deere, working with them today, is turning them on by team, turning them on by workspace. So set small sets of APIs. Turn on one or two rules, socialize them, get buy-in, help people understand what the rule means, why it impacts, how it makes your documentation better, how it's going to save you pain and suffering down the road. One company I worked with, I won't say who it is, they had a outage on Black Friday, and it was a Kong setting configuration for the size of the payload, and this coupon deal would add on a line to the coupon, and it kept getting bigger throughout the day, and so having a spectral rule that would catch that in the configuration before it went out ended up helping with that. And but you got to socialize it with teams, make sure they're aware of it, so that collaboration and that socialization of those standards, whether it be Spectral, whether it's Open API, Swagger, JSON schema, start small, pick a cohort, socialize it, get buy-in before you move too fast, too far.
I think the other part of this is also when we talk about governance or standardization, it seems like it is a one-time thing where you come up with a set of standards and rules that need to be followed with an organization, and we're not going to touch it for, I don't know, a year or 2 years or 3 years before we are looking at evolution. I think that's a big mistake because ultimately it needs to be an iterative thing as well. So once those rules are put in practice, how are people actually working with those rules? Are they working? Are they not working? You need to be able to review that. You need to do that in a collaborative way. And I think that's kind of what your situation is, where your committee or whoever set those standards needed to have a faster review process, ideally, where they're taking feedback from you, they're speaking with you, collaborating with you, and potentially at least starting off with a process that will enable you to be a little bit bolder or do your job a little bit better or faster, more productively. So there is the process side of things where you have to review those standards as frequently as possible, maybe not every day, but at least over a period of time. But at the same time, having the right tools, I feel, like I think our guests mentioned, having potentially a sandbox where you try things out, you POC something, you work that out, and share your findings, socialize that, and tell them, okay, this is going to be exciting, this is important, this is useful, because this is going to drive this kind of value. Not just, the next shiny object that says, oh, because X, Y, and Z is doing it, this is the thing to be, this is the place to be, that's why I'm doing it. That's probably not going to fly as well. But if you show that, okay, I'm doing this because it's going to drive true value, it's going to make life even 1% easier or faster, that's going to be the reason why that change happens in an organization. So maybe that's another way of looking at it, but perhaps that'll help in a more collaborative and review process that might help you. All right, questions? Anybody else? Anything that might have popped up? DevOps, platform engineering, or general practices, tools? No? Yes, no? So back to us. In terms of tools and where you see the importance of tools coming into this, are there specific things that now need to be part of your tool set? Because ultimately, once again, we talk about platform engineering, we talk about the tool chain, we talk about the workflows. So workflows, processes, people, collaboration, and then the tool sets that come in. Do you see any specific tools that need to be part of your arsenal? Or is it just making the tools that exist better and easier to handle? What's the sort of balance there?
Well, I'm biased. You definitely have to have a gateway. You definitely have to have some type of analytics. But in general, when you look at tooling, build, what is your core competency, right? But it doesn't necessarily mean you need to build everything. One of the things I love about the current ecosystem around API development and deploying APIs is you can pick and choose what you like, right? So if you look at how you deploy API 10 years ago, it was almost like the kitchen sink. You had one single massive appliance, and that was a way to handle everything from governance to analytics to security and everything else. Now you can choose, if you want Tyke as your gateway, you can choose Moesif as your analytics provider, and there's a plugin that they work together, right? And so whether you want open source, whether you want something managed, whether you want to use, Postman for API design and development, and they all work together in a cohesive way. And I think that's a really important thing when we think about picking different tools.
Good job plugging Postman for me, so it saves me some time there. Thank you. Yeah, and that's our strategy. Is everyone keeps asking us, are we going to have a gateway? No, because we have Tyke, and we have Kong, and we have Nginx. We have, and I won't say any of the old guard API management because I'm tired of saying their names. But so I'm going to take a different tack from tooling, because you already mentioned Postman. Is I'm all about the specifications. So Open API, Async API, JSON schema, and Postman collections, GraphQL, gRPC protocol buffers, web sockets. These are the protocols and patterns, or the specifications that matter to me, and the tooling is what makes them, because no one really cares about specs except for like maybe me and like 3 other people. But the specs are what you import and export. It's the lifeblood. It's how you enable this platform capabilities to work in a seamless way, in a consistent way, so we're speaking the same language. And think of open APIs like the English language. It's that common, Salesforce has an open API, Twilio, Twitter. Well, Twitter did up until about two weeks ago, so they don't anymore. But it's the lingua franca of the tooling, and the tooling is what makes these work. So the specifications are the lifeblood of the tools in our toolbox today.
And I think you've hit the nail on the head there. I think we do tend to focus a lot on tooling sometimes, and we get hung up on some of the specific tools that must be part of your arsenal. Whereas what you really need to think about is your own requirements, and your requirements today may change, they may vary, and they may evolve. So ultimately what's driving some of those tools underneath is going to be those open standards. Well, that is open API specification, that could be open telemetry, that could be some other specification that comes up at some other time. But ultimately that common language is, if you've got that as part of your arsenal, then the tools that support all of that makes your life a lot easier. You can integrate things as you choose. You can swap things in and out as you choose, not getting tied too deeply into specific ecosystems. So all of those things would matter and make life a lot more easier. So perhaps don't think about tools specifically, like specific tools will give you the supremacy over the others. It's not a silver bullet, ultimately. It is going to be a combination of things, but look at the right processes, look at the right standards, and tools that enable you to do and adopt things properly. All right, if there are no further questions, then we'll probably come to the end of it. I think we're almost to the hour now. So I just want to have some closing statements, perhaps. I think any key takeaways, if there was one thing that hopefully our audience takes back from today, anything that you want to highlight that we've discussed today. So go ahead, we'll start with you, Derric.
Always think about who your user is, whether that's an external customer, whether it's an internal developer, whether it's maybe an executive or maybe the finance team. That can make your job a lot easier if you really tie whatever it is that you're creating to the value that particular user gets.
Yeah, second that. The APIs, the tools, specs, none of this matters. It's all about the people. I tell you, it's the only thing that keeps us going. It's the only reason it matters. So the tools will change, your IDs will come and go, it's the people and the enablement and making our lives easier. So that's the key to longevity in a tech career, I feel like. I started developing it, my first job was in 1987, so been doing it a while, and if you focus on the human beings, you'll last a long time.
That's perfect. I don't think I can really top that, but I would essentially just add to that a little bit with there's the people focus, but also understand what you need as obviously a developer yourself or as part of an organization, but also what your organization needs. Just seeing what your competitors are doing, what everybody else is doing in your industry may not map to exactly what you're doing. What they might be doing in a version 42 of their product may not be what you need for a version 1 of your product. So you need to sort of be a little bit more mindful and a little bit of having a better understanding of what kind of problem space you are in. And then ultimately it comes down to people and their happiness that comes to the fore, and that's what we're enabling with platform engineering. So that's as good as I think we can end on in terms of notes. So thank you so much, everyone, for showing up. Thank you so much for spending your evening with us. It's been a fantastic conversation. I've been absolutely excited to be hosting this after a very long time. And once again, we're going to be hanging around after this. So if you've got any questions, you want to connect in person, please do so. And thank you so much once again for coming here. There's a couple of swags over there. So if you want to just check those, take those, feel free. There's food behind with drinks. So feel free to grab some of those as well. So once again, thank you so much. Thank you, Moesif, for sponsoring the location. Thank you so much for doing that. And thank you, Kin and Postman, for joining us for the panel. Thank you, everyone. And have a lovely evening.